Okay, guys, you're very welcome to this webinar. It's just 12 o'clock, so we were just explaining to our guest Senne that Irish people can sometimes be a little bit late. So we've about 20 people, actually we've about 25 registered. So we expect probably about 20 people here today. I'm just going to do a brief intro now while people are coming in, and then Senne will start his presentation probably for around about 60 minutes or so. But if you want to, you can ask questions during that. We can make it a little bit more interactive. And I'll probably have to repeat this when more people come in, but you can use the Q&A to put in any questions, but equally you can stick your hand up as Senne is presenting. So if you want to actually ask something, on a particular slide or some particular point that he's making at that time, please do put your hand up and we'd welcome that. So in the first instance, I'm just going to give a very brief intro to myself, and then Rosanna from the MedLink cluster in Galway as well will also introduce herself, and then we'll kick off with Senne from Comate. So look, I can see a few cluster members here, so we'll keep this very short. So I'm the manager of the Connected Health and Wellbeing cluster based out of DKIT, supporting collaboration and innovation in health tech. So we're co-organising this event with a sister cluster based out of Galway. So I'm going to let Rosanna just give a quick intro to yourself.
Thank you, Brendan. Delighted to co-host this session this morning with you and Comate. It was great to be introduced to Comate also from one of the CEOs from a Galway startup company. So I'm the manager of the MedLink cluster. We're based out of ATU Galway, focusing on the medical device ecosystem. Not as long established as the Connected Health and Wellbeing cluster, but we've been up and running this past year. So we do a lot for the startups, the scale-up companies in the medical device ecosystem, and some work with the multinationals. So if you're interested to learn more what we do in MedLink, please reach out, LinkedIn page, website. But yes, great this morning to have the session. Thanks, Brendan and Gwen, for getting this up and running.
Thanks very much, Rosanna. And look, in the past, I suppose the MedLink cluster and the Connected Health cluster have done some activity together, but it's been a while. We've had this conversation a lot, and I think Senne will probably see it as well, that sort of conversion across medtech and health tech, from product development and everything from a marketing perspective. So I see us doing more stuff together, especially maybe for some of the SMEs and the internationalization side of things. But look, it's great to kickstart this. So because there's members of both clusters, if anybody wants to use the chat facility, just put in your name, the name of the company, maybe the website or what you do, a quick line or two. So because, as I said, it's going across both clusters. And then just to repeat what I said earlier on, Senne is going to present. You're very welcome to raise your hand and ask questions throughout his presentation, which will be about 60 minutes. But you can also stick it into the Q&A there. And we're recording this at the moment, but when we're the Q&A session at the end, we'll stop the recording and there'll be an opportunity to actually ask questions at that stage as well. So I'm not going to do a major introduction, Senne. I know you've a project manager with Comate. I've been looking at, obviously, your website. I see your experience across health tech, med tech, life sciences, other sectors, and I know you work across other sectors as well. So this is something, obviously, that both myself and Rosanna see the whole time. How do you get it from idea to MVP to fully developed product? I think you're going to share some of the success stories, but also some of the pitfalls and some of the mistakes that you've seen as well, which is, definitely at least as important as some of the successful ones. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can introduce yourself better than I can do. So thanks very much again.
Right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. at first. It's a nice show up, I see. So I will immediately start sharing my screen, explain a little bit about Comate, about myself, and then we can dive into some more topics related to hardware. So yeah, as an introduction, Comate, we're a Belgian-based design and engineering firm. Our motto is giving ideas the best chance to succeed. We really believe in that. So what we do actually is provide design and engineering services for other companies. That means developing devices and machines for other companies. Big part of that is also that we take no IP rights as compared to some other players in that market that do, for obvious reasons, as it aligns with our vision, being again giving ideas the best chance to succeed. We are purely have a service-based model. So that's a little bit an idea of Comate. We're about 60, 70 people strong, engineers, designers, project managers, of course. And yeah, all sorts of specialists. Different sectors, as already mentioned here, that we're active in. We have active implants, life sciences, consumer devices, medical devices, surgical equipment, measurement equipment, stuff like that. And mainly our expertise resides in mechanical engineering, electronics, software, firmware, specifically for our division around medical implants. We have a lot of expertise in wireless power transfer, usability engineering, industrial design, and also compliance. Could be CE marking, but also beyond that for United States or different regions. But as we're in Europe, CE is the one we deal with most, let's say. And in context of the medical devices, we are also ISO 13485 certified. Yeah, as a that way we can be a certified supplier to most of our customers. So right today, I want to talk to you a little bit about going from, actually indeed, it was well put, from an idea to an MVP, and from MVP to production, and everything in between. And I really want to talk a little bit about the most common traps we see, or the most common pitfalls that we see with specifically with hardware. Who am I? I should update my picture. It's more hair, less beards. It's the other way around today. But yeah, I've been with Comate for about 13 years, building my expertise in hardware. I've been and still am a design engineer. Same thing. I've been, still am project manager. I was the team leader of the design team. I've been a fractional CPO, product manager at several hardware startups. And I was also for some time the director of design and engineering at Comate. Today, my efforts are mainly focused on managing our startup program, in which we provide services that are attuned to the needs of startups, which are much different than those of the larger SMEs or even corporates. One thing I should mention is, while I do have experience in medical devices, and some of the examples will relate to that, a lot of the examples are actually centered around consumer devices, since that's my main source of expertise or experience, let's say. Nevertheless, I promise there's at least one very relevant example from a medical device I've worked on several years back. But anything I tell you today is applicable to hardware, is applicable to medtech hardware. So yeah, these learnings definitely transfer. And if you do have more specific questions about medtech, I am pretty versed in all the regulations and everything that comes with it. And I've did several projects in that space as well. So feel free to definitely ask about that as well. All right, enough about me. I say we get started. And as I mentioned, yeah, our focus is hardware. And everybody knows, of course, you've heard this a million times, that hardware is hard. Why is that? Well, the reason is actually pretty simple. It's time and money, to the extent that that's the cost of an iteration cycle, as of course compared to software, where you can just develop, build and test something. With hardware, there come two new components, and that's paying and waiting. So you develop a new ID solution, new feature, whatever. You need to order parts, pay for it. You need to wait for them to arrive. and then build it, and then you can test them. So these are all things that are a bit frightening to some people, especially investors or the money people. But that doesn't mean it's not fun. I really enjoy working in hardware much more than I would in the software space, but that's besides the point. With that in mind, I want to talk to you a little bit about the 7 most common traps or pitfalls I've noticed in hardware over the last 13 years. They are, number 1, no proven willingness to pay. This is one I see coming over and over again, and I'll explain in a minute. But it's amazing to see a lot of people starting a high capital investment project such as hardware without first validating their market. This is also something that one of the cluster partners, Hi, if I'm not mistaken, is very good at helping you with. We do a little bit of this at Comate as well, but there are other. For us, the main thing is the design and engineering stuff. But I'll come back to this in a minute. What I also see oftentimes is people saying they have an MVP, but it's actually quite bloated. There's too many features to be rightfully called an MVP. A lack of clear requirements is something very useful when you're developing hardware, but I still see too many startups that are not aware of the fact and are not managing these properly. Addressing compliance, especially for medtech, this is a very important one, of course, but even for non-medtech, we see people look at it often as an afterthought, which is not how you go about compliance. It really starts at the beginning. Same thing with managing risk. A lot of these companies fail to implement decent risk strategies from day one, which can really be very beneficial. On the other hand, can be very costly if you don't. And then scaling up towards production is something a lot of people misunderstand. Like they feel it's just the push of a button, let's make 1 million, and that's it. That's actually when the real work still has to begin. And it's very last, and it's very related to the previous one, is unrealistic ideas of cost and pricing, which again go hand in hand with your development budget, with your targets during development. So something you really should try and figure out as soon as possible, because it all ties back to doing proper development without too much risk. All right, let's get started with number 1. And I'll be very brief about it because, like I mentioned, there is a different partner in the cluster, from what I've been told, which is Hi, who deals with this specifically. But for us, it's really important as well because, before we start a very expensive development cycle, it's nice to know that there is a market and that people are willing to pay for the solution. For you as a founder, as a hardware startup, you really have to prove that your customer's hair is on fire and that they have a problem, indeed, that the problem exists, that those people in question understand they have a problem, and that they are actively looking for a solution. They might have created homegrown solutions. It's always a very good signal. And not unimportantly, they have money to solve the problem. This is not always the user of your product, right? Depending on your business model, this could be a different stakeholder that actually take care of this, but it should be there, of course. Here's an example of what I'm talking about on how you can do this for hardware. There are many ways, and this is also immediately one of the main examples I'll be using today, which is a consumer device, as I said. This is the Meal Hero, which is a smart steamer that back in the day it combined with home delivered food boxes, so you could easily prepare food together with an app. It was very simple. The app knew the ingredients you had in your freezer based on the packages that were delivered, and you could just, it made the different combinations you could make in the app. You select one, it tells you which ingredients to put in the steamer, and the cooking program is loaded automatically. Push the button, and in like 20-30 minutes, you have a healthy, fresh meal. So that was the idea, but these guys, before we started the actual development, we collaborated with them on creating a video. We did build a little prototype like this, but it was actually just an empty box with some blinking lights, so it didn't cost a whole bunch. And this, they use it in their case for like a Kickstarter campaign to see like, are there customers, are there people willing to pay for this even before we're even starting this project. There are many other ways of doing it. There are some very good resources on this. If you just Google sell before you build from different instances, I would highly recommend just looking that up. But also, like I mentioned, Hi is also a partner here that could help you out with that. So yeah, this is a brief intro to the product that you will be seeing a couple times today. Bring me to the second trap, the bloated MVP, which is also something that the guys from Meal Hero kind of had a problem with. So what I would always advise anyone, start from to avoid it. First, start listing with what exactly should my product be able to do, right? So you start from the big idea you have, like the fully fledged, completely developed product, and just go on and list all the steps in the use flow, list all the sub steps to get a big picture of like, okay, this is the perfect ideal version of my product, and this is what I would like it to be able to do. Next, try to reduce that to like, based on what I've written down here, what is now the actual core user loop? What's the essence of what my device of my idea is doing? In this case, it was the user orders ingredients, it chooses a dish, which is auto-prepped by the steamer. You can then, of course, eat it, and you clean the steamer, and you start all over again at a different day. That's a first step, and I'm coming back to this in a minute. Based on that, you should look at like, how are we going to do it? Okay, so this is really just mapping out the solution part of it. So this is a visual representation of how their ideal steamer would work, but this is a really good starting point to start cutting down on features, working towards an MVP. So in their case, they removed a bunch of the heaters, the LEDs. They went for a wired connection. Instead of an app, it went through the website. They didn't have an ERP system or anything. It was just the founder's mailbox. So really, really dumbing it down a bit. And they ended up actually with something like this. So very ugly, lots of off-the-shelf components, IKEA trays, they just drilled some holes in. So yeah, really bootstrapped MVP, very nice. But one of the things they kind of overlooked is they were already so invested in what the solution should be that they also built their MVP around that. So if you would go back and look at the core user loop, what the actual user loop was, if you forget a bit about the solution, so be solution agnostic, actually from the point of view of a user, they just want to choose a dish and eat the dish as soon as possible, and they want it to be healthy. That is actually the core problem they're looking to solve. And if you look at it that way, there are many different ways you could do it that don't even involve a steamer. And there were a lot of emerging competitors at the time also that were exactly addressing it in a different way. So like things that just like the home delivered food boxes that are now very prevalent, all these types of variations of it, all of these didn't have hardware components, but it's solving the same problem. The truth was actually that the users didn't really care that much for the steamer itself, but they did care about the fact that I can have quick and healthy foods in my house, just with minimum amounts of effort. So if we would take this principle or this core loop instead of the other one, you could end up with something like this, which is in essence is just a dumbed down version of what we have here. Cut down even more, and what we often see is that an MVP for even a hardware startup is often actually a service offering, because service offerings are great. You can replace a lot of stuff, technical stuff, just by humans doing things. And it was the very same here. They could definitely have first tested their waters of the market without actually building the entire steamer and building a customer base. And it might have even resulted in a pivot should they have chosen to do this. In the end, they didn't, so they went on with the steamer. This was something that in the later stage, unfortunately, they did after the pandemic. They went out of business. One of the main reasons being because of the pandemic, there was a lot of competitors that were doing actually this. So who knows, if they had pivoted back then, they might still be around. But yeah, that is not for me to predict. This also leads into the third trap of no clear requirements, because we've now been mentioning an MVP that's maybe sometimes too bloated, and setting up really good requirements can help you out in avoiding that as well, and is also very useful in just moving forward in development. So coming back to like this diagram right here, you could actually rewrite this completely solution agnostic. Just ignore the solution, because if you look at this diagram, nowhere is there a solution mentioned. So this diagram applies just as well to this one as it does to this one. It's the same. It's a different solution, but it's the same function it's completing. You have a user, you have an inventory database, ordering system, ingredients that need to be stored, and a cooking system. But the cooking system could be a frying pan or it could be a smart steamer. That doesn't really matter. The result is actually pretty much the same. So based on that functional diagram, you can start writing requirements of what should this system I've described, what should it be able to do? What you shouldn't do is write it as in you can scan a label of the frozen ingredients with an RFID on the steamer, because this includes a solution. And also it's written from the point of view of the user. If you are writing requirements, you should actually write it like this. For instance, the system is able to recognize different ingredients. This is solution agnostic, and it's written from the point of view of the system. And what this allows you to do is actually, if I can move forward, yes. You can start listing your requirements. Like on the left side, you have the functional requirements, which are actually, none of these describe a solution. They just describe the function of the system. And on the right-hand side, you could look at like, how are we solving for this, right? Which solution are we using to satisfy this requirement? And the interesting thing about that is that on the left side, you can, this will always stay the same pretty much, unless you're pivoting heavily or you're learning new things from the market that require different requirements for your users. But the thing on the right, it can always be changed. But how do you decide if and when to change something? We always try to rank these things, like the left one, looking at what is the value to your customer or your stakeholder in the end of this functionality. There are different ways to assess that. And on the right-hand side, you can look at the way I've chosen to actually solve it. How technically challenging will this be? So for an MVP, what you want to look at is like these high value items on the left, those high value functional requirements, and ideally focus on those that have a low technical challenge. But as you'll see, oftentimes the ones with the most value tend to have a bit higher of a technical challenge. But that can be really fun brainstorms and workshops to try and figure out like, okay, how can we satisfy this high value need without having something super technical? What parts of a technical system can we replace with service or with humans for our first version, for our MVP? So combining these two rankings, let's say, is a really good tool in trying to figure out what should go into an MVP and will also help you avoid that bloated MVP. That's one step, but on the other hand, it's already a good basis to have a proper product requirement document moving forward once you're ready for actual development. That is clear to everybody involved, yourself, your team, partners, what it is exactly that the system should do. And it leaves room for thinking about different solutions, which is definitely great, a great way to approach development in any case. Which also brings us to the fourth trap, because up until now we've been talking about functional requirements. This is, of course, what your system or product or device should be doing in function of the stakeholders and the end users, describing a proper functioning device. But compliance, of course, deals with legal requirements, which is the second component of your requirements, actually. And we do see a tendency, and much less so with medtech companies, of course, because it's much more obvious. But oftentimes people address this, or founders and startups address this too late, actually. They think like, oh, CE marking, it's just something we'll do at the end and we'll be fine. it's definitely not. It's definitely something you should start doing up front. So to use the example of our steamer, the solutions that you choose, so we just talked about solutions, they definitely impact which directive might be applicable. Of course, if you're a medical device, it will definitely always be the medical device directive or regulation, the MDR. But that's typically not the only thing that applies. In this example, for instance, and it chose to use an RFID. It chose to have this thing on Wi-Fi instead of on an Ethernet cable, which changes the directive that applies. So it was LVD, it then changed to RED because of these choices, which also implies new legal requirements for you to comply with, different testing you should be doing. And a lot of these things for compliance are not just, oh, we do some testing and we get a check mark or a label. A lot of these just really need you to design for them also, really need to figure out what do I have to take into account when I'm designing my system, so I have a higher chance of passing my tests once that day comes. So really design with compliance intent. And to be able to do so, you should know what you should be compliant with. And that starts at the very beginning, once you have a first idea of a concept or an idea. So again, just don't hope you'll be compliant when it's designed. It's almost never the case. So be prepared and know what's coming up front. And just to give you we do entire workshops on this topic, which last a day. So I'll be brief about this. But just to give you an idea, you often hear directives and standards, two very different things, but they do work together. Directives and regulations, these are legally required, right? But they often dictate like what should you comply with, but not how to comply. And that's where standards come in. So there is always a list of harmonized standards that go with a directive or regulation, which you can look up and that support you in achieving compliance. But they, in and of themselves, are not legally required. You can also be compliant in different ways. But it definitely helps using a standard. I'll give a quick example because people get confused sometimes about compliance. Being compliant or having a CE mark or whatever doesn't mean you have a qualitative product. It's not the same thing. It says nothing about durability or proper functioning of your device. To give a quick example, this was a training device we built for the football market. And if you were looking at standards and regulations, one of the standards that was applicable you could use was this one, which is for information technology equipment. But in essence, that standard is built for internet routers. This device didn't exist, so it doesn't have a specific standards. You either end up with very generic standards or with something that's built for something. It applies because it has wireless transmissions, etc. But it's definitely not a router. So for instance, there is a test protocol in there saying, oh, it should, if you drop it from 5 centimeter height, it should survive the fall, a drop test. And no way that applies or is enough for this device. Then you have to fall back on your functional requirements. You have to think about the context it will be used in this case on a football pitch. People running about with their shoes with studs that can create impact on these things. It's a completely different context. So again, just relying on CE marking compliance for the quality of your product is definitely not enough. You always have to think about the context and your functional requirements as well. Because in the end, compliance is only dealing with safety. They're looking at what is legally required to have a safe product, while your functional requirements are really defined by your application, by your users, to really look at when do we deem this a functional device? You can have a perfectly functional device, but one that's not safe, and the other way around could be an extremely safe device that's not functional for your market. And together, these two are actually the building blocks of your requirements. So moving forward, it's really good to have both of those as a basis before you dive into actual full-on hardware development. And a question I get asked a lot is, yeah, but we're just building an MVP. We're gonna test it with like 5 or 10 people. Do we need to be compliant? Do we need to certify this? And of course, as always, it depends. The strict answer would be yes, always. But yeah, there are some nuances. It basically boils down to assessing risk, right? So for medtech devices, oftentimes this will be much later in the context of like a clinical trial or something. Doesn't mean you cannot do some user testing and things like that. But if you're actually putting an MVP as a product in the market, I would definitely decide and assess the risk and see, like, can we do it without compliance? Can we swallow the risk? Sometimes for products that sit in like low risk categories that use lots of off-the-shelf components, and even then it's limited to like a couple of units you could do this with, because beyond a certain amount of units in the field, you are definitely legally required to be fully compliant. And one way to go about it is also to share that risk. So if you go the number one route, I would always inform the people you're giving the products to that they are not compliant, that they're not CE marked or whatever applies for the region you're deploying those. And the third option is just go ahead and make sure it's compliant. And definitely for the higher risk products. So definitely for medtech, there's just no other way about it. I would almost always make sure that you are compliant, even when you're still testing. And that, again, dovetails into the next trap, which is often a lack of risk strategy. So I was mentioning assessing risk in the face of compliance, but it actually goes beyond that, because reducing risk in your development is actually quite easy in the beginning. If you're de-risking the markets, you're doing market validation, or you are de-risking technology. You're looking at what technologies might work, which might fail, and I'll address this in a minute. So your ability to reduce risk in the beginning is still very big, because you're very early in the design. You can change things very quickly just by updating a sketch even, or rewriting an ID. Things can change at a high pace. But once you move through those phases and you go into development, more and more costs actually get allocated, and it's your classical 20-80 distribution. Like 80% of your project costs are allocated in the first 20% of your project based on your design decisions that you make here. And moving onward, actually the cost of changing something goes up dramatically, especially once you're entering manufacturing. Then it's almost a one-way street. And your ability to reduce risk, because the solution is getting more and more cemented, is actually dramatically reduced. So the best space, or the best time space to reduce risk is very early in the project. And from then onward, it's very much managing risk as much as possible. But yeah, changing things becomes very expensive the later down the line you are in development. Another thing to keep in mind when you are managing risk, and very applicable for medical devices, is you have to make sure that the risk management is fit for purpose. So mitigating risk should be proportionate to the risk that's associated with the device. So your risk management strategies will be much more intense for something like a breathing apparatus than it would be for like a stethoscope, obviously, because the inherent risk is just much lower. Same thing if we talk about risk reduction. It's always reducing risk or mitigating risk. It's not necessarily eliminating risk. We try to reduce them as far as possible, but if you would look at something like an X-ray machine, you could completely eliminate risk by removing the radioactive components, but that would make your machine inoperable. It would no longer be functional. So instead, you keep in that risky aspects of the radiation, but you do everything you can to reduce the risks that it might pose as much as possible in a way that still satisfies the main feature or the main functionalities of your product, right? So talking about risk categories, as I mentioned, there typically two major things to consider, which is one is your product risk and the other is your technical risk, where technical risk is like how technically challenging is this? Can we get this to work? If you look it on the right hand side, it's one of the very first robot vacuum cleaners it was very technically challenging back in the day. Of course, something like an implant or a pacemaker is again is high technical risk. That's one end of the spectrum. The other thing is high product risk. So meaning if it fails, what happens? How bad is it? If you have something like, of course, if a pacemaker fails, that's the worst thing that could happen. While on the other hand, if your Roomba fails, if some dirty floors, it's not really that big of a deal, right? Same thing here, something like internet infrastructure, like a router. It's a low technical risk, but if that router is used in a high-stakes environment and people really rely on the connection, it could be a very bad thing if it stops working. Same thing if you have like a smart lock for your home. That's a market risk actually, because if that thing doesn't work even just once, people are not going to use that product anymore, right? And then even on the low end, you have things like something like a Fitbit. And while I would generally say that, like, of course, these type of products on the upper right-hand side require high risk management. The others may be moderate, and this one may be basic risk management, but it's still, even for something like this, requires risk management. Because to use this example, Fitbit actually had to recall some smartwatches because of burn hazards. So they had a component that became too hot, and it could cause burns on the wrist of people wearing it. They ended up having to pay a $12 million fine, not because of the risk that happened, because that can happen. So don't be alarmed by that, just in and of itself. But they failed to respond to it correctly. So they got a notification from the authorities, like, okay, this risk was flagged, and they actually kind of ignored it as long as they could, instead of just making sure that these were removed from the market immediately, because that's very, very costly to do, of course. And they actually failed to comply to work with the authorities, and that's why they got fined for this amount, not because of the malfunction itself. In each case, if you run into something like this, which might happen at some point in the future, your best bet is always just work with the authorities and make sure you did your homework up front, you did your compliance assessment and your risk assessment, and that you can show that at very least you did everything you could to prevent this. But you will not get fined for the failure itself. Worst case, you could get sued, of course, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, just to give you an idea, like even these low risk products, you should definitely manage the risk, because it could have some unpleasant consequences. One way of dealing with it, you have different tools for this, but FMEA is one of the most widely recognized, let's say. It looks at what is your potential failure mode, what is something that could happen with your product or with your application, what's the effect of that, what's the negative effect, and how are we assessing this risk? How risky is it? What's the worst thing that can happen? How probable is it to happen? And then based on that, you actually look at how do we want to mitigate this risk? How are we going to avoid this, that it happens, or that it's reduced at the very least? And to give you an example, I promised to have a MedTech example in here that I worked on. And this is MedVision. It's actually a spin-off of Comate from, it's going to be 12 years ago, I think. So it was very early in my career. And yeah, it was a spin-off. And there's some of the guys in the spin-off were a bit action biased, let's say. So not everything was done as it should have been, but it had its consequences. So this is a bit of a small story about why you shouldn't wait with risk management at the very end. Same thing with compliance. Try and do it from the beginning. So to give a little bit of context, this device is actually affixes to a retractor, which is used during hip surgeries. So they use it to pull the muscles aside so the surgeon can get to the joints of the hip. And this actually this little device allows the surgeon to manipulate the retractors in 3D space without the need of having like 2 assistants there holding the retractors all of the time. So what happened is that this was actually completely developed. Injection molding tools had already been made. We had like the final production parts, and they were actually ready to go into production. And I got the question like, oh, yeah, to be compliant, we still need to do a risk assessment. Could you have a look at it, please? Which is, I have to tell you, way too late in the process. So I took about 20 minutes to figure out, like, oh, could happen that a surgeon places this thing upside down on a retractor before using it. What might happen? And I tested it. This might happen. The whole thing could come apart with force because it was actually designed to take on the loads in one direction, because it was always assumed it was going to be used in the correct way. It was actually quite easy to use it in the wrong way. It was not designed to prevent that. So this thing actually came apart with force, which would allow small particles to enter an open wound. So good thing we did a risk assessment, because then we figured this out in time before we went to market. But bad thing that it happened so late, because the only way to stop it was actually adding a little screw in here. But in this case, it required to cutting one of the molds of the injection molds in half, putting a new block of steel on it, and then machining it all over again to make sure that we can put a screw in it. So in essence, this screw ended up costing about 20,000 euros, and it could have been avoided if, the risk assessment happened like 6 months earlier. So just as a takeaway, don't wait too long with this. It's actually an FMEA. It's not that hard. Anyone can do it, and it might save you a massive headache later on. Another thing is feasibility. We've been talking about safety risks up until now. You, of course, also have your technical and your even usability risks. So to use the example of the steamer again, what I would advise anyone, if you're assessing risk, if you're checking for feasibility, don't try to overbuild it. Look at what assumptions are we making, which of these carry the most risk, and how can we test for that? How can we make sure that this assumption becomes a fact, something that we know for sure? And for that, I would always say only build what's necessary to test those riskiest assumptions, so often called a RAT, riskiest assumption test. To give some examples, it could be, in case of the steamer, we needed to figure out what was the best way to deliver the steam in the compartment in a way that then the cooking fluids could go away without going back into the water reservoir, stuff like that. Had to make sure that for all different food types, it was equally distributed in terms of heat. So we built a bunch of different designs, but only built one container, made it modular so we could test different ways of having the steam enter, and then put some testing probes in there. And we went to town with this setup for a couple of weeks to figure out the best design without building the complete steamer, as it wasn't necessary to figure that out. Same thing for some other stuff, like we had a specific waterproofing design for a seal. We just quickly built a scale model. The seal, of course, was on 1-to-1 scale, but the rest wasn't. We just needed to test the seal itself, so that the cross section. Again, don't need the whole device for that. And we put in some other stuff we wanted to test as well, in terms of the LEDs, etc. Again, just building very small, very actionable prototypes to go and figure out if we can solve this before we go into full-on development mode. And same thing is true for usability, especially in medtech. Usability is now a regulatory affair as well, because usability, of course, can lead to risks if something is improperly designed in the way that the user should interact with it. It might increase the risk of misuse, which might increase the risk of just safety risks, like we saw with the device I was talking about earlier. So for this, we often, again, we identify what are potential use risks, or we try to emulate the use flow with just very early mockups. Could be just cardboard, an iPad, whatever. Also, like ergonomically speaking, we have a lot of near body devices for which we very early on build different models to see like how is this when users have to wear it an entire day, have to sleep with it? It's the same principle. You're looking at assumptions you're making, you're looking at the risk they carry, and you're looking at, okay, how can I test this as quickly and cheaply as possible and reduce this assumption or reduce this risk? Because again, early on, you can reduce a lot of risk, but the later on you go, if you go into manufacturing, it becomes really, really difficult to change something. You can, of course, change things, but the cost is immense. Just think of it like this. If you want to change the position of a button on your device, in here, it's just making a new sketch. In the end, it's making new tooling, right? New molds, new injection molds, things like that. And it takes weeks, if not months, versus a couple of minutes at the beginning. So that first part is really important to get it right, because afterwards it becomes tricky. So moving on from that, as I just mentioned, manufacturing scaling, a lot of startups underestimate the step or misunderstand it, because for a lot of people, it's like, okay, it's to bring down unit costs, right? That's the main purpose. We're scaling up, we're investing in tooling, stuff like that. That's definitely part of it, but there's much more to it than just that. So what we call industrialization is actually the step in moving from, okay, we now have a fully functional prototype that looks like, works like a final product. A lot of people then think we're done, right? Now we just push the button and we make 1,000. Unfortunately, it does not work like that. And the majority of the work is actually still to begin, because then you come in a whole different ballgame. And one of the things you're looking for is actually predictability or repeatability, depending on how you look at it. Because you want to make sure that like the first one you make and the 100th one you make and the 1,000,000th one you make, they are all the same, they work the same, and they are predictable. There's some simple reasons for that all boil down to compliance as well. But you want to make sure that everything you're building is actually, in essence, the same thing. And it's harder than you would think. To give another example for contrast, we also do like heavy machinery and equipment, like you see on this end. These things typically very low volumes, like you build 1 or 2 a year, maybe 5, and that's about it. On the right side, you have our lovely steamer I've been talking about all this afternoon. Yeah, this is something that has a much higher volume. You make thousands of these, if not more. Why is this important? Because for compliance or certification, it requires that the thing you're testing is representative of the product you're bringing to market, right? So this requires that the used materials are representative, that the manufacturing techniques are representative, that the process is representative. This also means like the way it is assembled, by who, by which methods, by which processes. The more these are alike and the more these are the same, the easier it becomes to scale compliance and also scale production, because you eliminate unpredictability. That's kind of what you're trying to do here. To give you an idea of low volume machine, yeah, you build one, you don't have a lot of processes around it, and then 6 months later you build another one with a different team, and you maybe update some parts, and that's all fine for that case, because then it just makes sense to certify them individually, right? You restart the compliance process each time over, which is fine because they have like a bigger gross margin. These are high ticket products or machines. This is quite normal for these types of things. But if you're making thousands or let alone millions, you cannot certify each and every one of them individually. It will cost you way much time and money. It's basically impossible. So what do, right? You certify samples, you do spot checks, you take on a batch of 1,000, maybe take 10 samples, and you go in and test those and certify those. And to be able to claim that then everything else you're building in a factory is also compliant, that of course means that you need to be able to prove that your way of manufacturing things, that your processes, your materials, everything is the same each time. And that's what industrialization is actually about controlling that process and controlling the outcome, and making sure that everything is predictable, that you can make these claims, that you don't need to certify everything. But that, of course, means like you need to control your supply chain, your material flow. If a supplier decides to use a different material the next day or a different component that's maybe functionally the same, but it was built in a different way, you need to flag that, you need to follow that up, you need to set up an argument as to why this does not change your compliance status. So this is actually not to be underestimated. And also just the mere fact of managing all these moving parts, let's say, is just a feat in and of itself together. A different thing is incoming inspections, because as an engineer, it's really nice that you can make a 3D model and a 2D drawing and say, like, this is what I want my part to be like. That doesn't mean that if the manufacturer makes it, that it's actually like you specified. He will not tell you if it's not the case. He's not going to check for it. That job is really up to you at the beginning, certainly. So it's really about checking, okay, the components we are receiving, are they actually as we have specified them? That goes for mechanical parts in terms of dimensions, geometry, material, functionality, but very much also for electronic components, like, is this resistor I received, does it have the correct rating? Does it actually match what it say on the data sheet? Surprise, surprise, it often does not. So you really need to check for that. Because if one of those things is just not right, your system will have a point of failure. So this is really important to check these things and make sure your suppliers are actually delivering what you agreed on. And this alone is already quite a task. And then there are things like having test benches. This is an example of we are testing the cycle loads and the capacities of these batteries that we get, just to make sure that they are functioning properly, that there are no ones that are faulty, before we actually integrate it in the product. And these things those boards you see, those testing equipment, we build it ourselves because it's different for each project. It's just not something you pick up off the shelf, because every test is different. You need to log those results. You need to have traceability. If something fails in the field, you need to know the serial number. You need to know when it was manufactured, which part it had, and why did it fail? Was it because of a test we did or didn't do? Was it because of our supplier that was not doing what he should have been doing? All of this stuff comes into play, and it's really it's a different ball game than just development. It's a really different type of expertise, let's say. Another thing people forget sometimes you have to build machines, right? Jigs and fixtures are part of that, ensuring repeatable outcomes, that things are assembled the same way over and over with the same precision, especially for like very small medical device applications. It becomes very important, like you have a curing station here and an assembly station for a connector. Same thing for electronics. You have those typical pin beds, those bed of nails they use. But you also need to develop a process, right, to ensure repeatable outcomes. These are things like assembly instructions, but also testing instructions. Again, it will be assembled in the end by people who did not develop the product. People who are just following instructions, people who are not knowledgeable about your product. Oftentimes they don't even know what it is they're assembling. All they know is, I need to follow these instructions, I need to shove it in this test machine, and I need to get a green light, and that's it. They don't know what the hell they're doing, basically. So it's really up to you to make sure that they do it properly, and that you can flag it if they are doing it improperly. And it actually comes also down to, how are you going to design the test line, the different assembly stations? How are they set up? How are we going to avoid that they're using the wrong screws? How are we going to check that everything is still in stock? When and where are we going to test? Are we going to test components before? How many? How are we doing it during production? When are we flashing our serial number? When are we engraving it? And at which point do we still do some tests at the end of the line? Which one do we do? Which one don't we do? This entire thing setting up, like I said, it's a different ball game, and people truly underestimate it. When they see the first prototype, they think they're done, but they most certainly are not. So to come back to my earlier question and to answer it for you, like what is industrialization? It's actually what you're doing in this stage. You're prototyping your supply chain and your assembly line to control predictability and to control cost. That is the process of industrializing. This is all the work you do before actually running the actual final assembly line and creating your first batch of products that will go to markets. And it's quite a task. So please don't please think about it when you're making your plannings. And for the last and seventh trap, it's related to this. Oftentimes at the beginning of projects, we also see that people are a little bit unrealistic maybe about costing and also about pricing. The examples I'll show are a bit more focused on consumer goods. So a lot of things that you'll be seeing now is very dependent on what your business model is, of course. But just keep in mind, it's much more than just having a bill of materials and giving it a 20% markup and you're done. So as a rule of thumb, your minimal sales price, if you have a sales model, of course, could be that you have a leasing model. It's typically like 3 or 5 times your BOM cost, so your bill of materials. Again, depending on the method of sales. But where does this number come from? And for MedTech, actually, it's typically a bit higher still. But it's really good to know upfront. Just a bit of background. If you look at hardware, you have a couple things in play. If your BOM, which is your bill of materials, just a list of your physical components. If your bill of labor, same thing but for all the manual labor that's required to handle, assemble, package your device. Your COGS, of course, your cost of goods sold. This is really BOM and ball with variable expenses. What's the unit cost of your device to get it to the point that it's ready to sell, that it's sitting in your warehouse as an SKU number, ready to go out the door when it's ordered. And then if you're a CapEx, which is your capital expenditures, your investments cost things, in case of hardware, things like injection molds, tooling, equipment, real estate also. And then your OPEX is what is your recurring fixed costs, right? What do you need to keep the business running, even if you're not selling anything? And then, of course, your suggested retail price. Again, for a consumer product, this is a relevant thing. But this is typically what you as the manufacturer would say, like it should be sold at this price if we're going through retail. And I really love this little graph because the MSRP is actually all of this. And as you can see, your bill of materials is only about 20 or 25% of that. So your cost of goods is about 25%. The bill of material is actually a bit lower. And like only 25% of this, if you're going through retail, again, are earnings. And keep in mind, these are earnings. This is not profit. Okay, so this is still what you need. This is your gross margins that you need to cover your OPEX and other expenses and keep the business running. And then, of course, end up with a little bit of profit at the end of the day. So yeah, not going to go into immense detail, but you start with your material costs and you have your assembly, quality control, packaging, scrap. So things that are just, you will never have 100% effective or efficient manufacturing line. Some things will just not be good enough and need to be scrapped, but that also costs money. Handling, shipping, warehousing. You adding your gross margin, which is typically about 50% for hardware if you're in a sales model. If you're in like an espresso model or something, it can be lower. So again, coming back to, it all depends on your revenue model. But this is like the general consensus, right? This is the money you'll be receiving, and everything else is actually going to financial platforms, to shipping, to return allowance, to customer acquisition costs. It might be a sales rep, it could be ad spend, whatever. But yeah, you have to spend money to make money. This is exactly that. So ending up in like wholesale, it's already like 3 times the original cost. If you look at retail, they take huge margins. Yeah, this is like your minimum price if you're going B2B or direct to consumer. If you're going through retail, it's typically much, much more. So again, my apologies for using the consumer goods as an example here. But it's definitely, lots of this stuff also holds up, even if it's a medical device. I would say it's typically more expensive because you also have to offset your all the added compliance costs you have with being compliant for the MDR. That adds a lot of cost in development and for your company as well in getting certified as a company also. So a question I get a lot is, okay, how can I then drive these cost of goods down? What are ways of going about that? And I would always ask first, like, do you need to, because the biggest lever you could pull is actually your pricing, because that all goes directly to your bottom line, and working on your COGS is definitely something you should be doing from the start, but there is a limit to it. At some point you have diminishing returns, so it's good to work on that always. But it's also good to really think about the pricing. And again, there are partners that could help you out with that, within figuring out like what is the market willing to pay for this, at which price point, using value-based pricing methods. It's definitely not our expertise, but it really helps if you have an idea of what can I possibly charge for this, and then we can kind of work back and look at what is now your budget for your bill of material to create a product that can do all these things, and that just gives a much more informed discussion from the start, or a much more informed development. So that's why I always try to challenge it. Don't look only at cost down, but also look at what can you do in the market on your pricing side of things. That as an aside, generally speaking, if you want to bring unit costs down, you need to bring capital expenditure up. This is an oversimplification. You'll see in a minute why. But generally speaking, we're talking about things like molds and tooling, which, for instance, a 3D print would be more expensive as a unit cost, but you have no upfront investment. But tooling is a big upfront investment, but the unit cost, it goes down 10-fold, 100-fold. So that's always the trade-off you need to make. Same thing in assembly. You can do everything manually and measure everything manually. Same thing with electronics. You could measure it all just by hand. Or you could build setups that speed up the process, that improve repeatability. Something like this, like a bed of nails, it really can test a complete PCBA in 2 minutes and give you a test report, something that would take a human much longer to do. So yeah, definitely worth some of these types of investments. And that, of course, brings your cost of goods down as well, right? But it's not as simple as this. You typically have this middle part, which is kind of tricky. So this goes up, this holds up for about up until like 50 units. And then it's really dependent on the techniques you're choosing. It might be that the capex like jumps up hugely, but then typically it's paired with a big jump down of your cost of goods. But it's never like, oh, I have 200 parts and I'm like in this sweet spot right here. There are always like inflection points. And it's really hard to tell because it's extremely dependent on your needs, your financial model, and on the type of product you're developing and the manufacturing techniques you're employing. So again, something I could go on about for a long time, but definitely something to keep in mind when thinking about cost structure. So right, a lot of talking from my end. Thank you very much for listening. Just as a summary, as a key takeaway, if you think about what you should remember, MVPs and requirements, learn to think solution agnostic upfront. This opens the door to different solutions that might be more beneficial. It opens the door to different types of MVPs that are not as costly, that allow you to validate your market much quicker, or even pivot to a more meaningful product. Design with compliance intent. Don't wait till the end to figure out what you need to be compliant with. But also keep in mind that certification alone isn't enough. It does not guarantee quality. It only looks at safety. The quality end is really coming from you guys. And risk management, start it as soon as you can, because the cost of change only goes up. And when you get around to that point when you're industrializing, don't just think about the cost only, but look to increase predictability and reliability of your production. Price, just that rule of thumb, 3x, 5x of your bill of material, probably even more for you guys. And the cost reductions do not scale linear in relation to CapEx, unfortunately. It has the inflection points, the drop-off points that you need to be mindful of. So I'm gonna hand over the words to you guys. So hopefully there was something in there for everyone. And yes, I'm happy to take any questions you might have at this point. So yeah, feel free to share any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Senne. Look, there's loads of really valuable tips there. I might start off with a question.